Hi, everybody.
I'm going to turn my body.
I can't. Can you see?
Yeah, we can see it. I mean, there.
Hi.
Okay.
Just
Here. I'm muted. Sorry, guys. Hold on.
so welcome to this class. We're super excited to have Jennifer Jenkins here with us to talk about story structure and finishing the race. She is an amazing person. You guys know her well. Probably if you follow anything, all things TABC, you'll be very familiar with Jen and what she does and what a big hand she has in running Teen Author Bootcamp. And I'm just going to read a little bio about her and then let her take over. So Jennifer Jenkins, with her degree in history and secondary education, Jennifer Jenkins had every intention of teaching teens to love George Washington, the Napoleonic Wars, and ancient Sparta until the writing began. She is the author of the Nameless Trilogy, To Kill a Curse, and Teen Writer's Guide, Your Roadmap to Writing. She is also the co-founder of Teen Author Bootcamp. She divides her free time between teaching creative writing classes at UVU, Utah Valley University, reading, taking spontaneous trips, researching random events from the past, and fostering her adrenaline junkie addictions. So welcome. Yay.
Thank you so much. I absolutely love that I get to help out. So originally, I'm just gonna, as I'm sharing my screen here. Oh, can you make me? Can you stop sharing and make me the lady? I originally, Amy Beatty was supposed to teach this class, and she is really a guru when it comes to plotting and all of that. And I totally think that she would have just killed this, but unfortunately, life happens sometimes, and she is not able to attend. So I'm really sorry for that. You guys, I feel like I have a little bit of an excuse. Hold on just one second. I'm pulling up a PowerPoint and then I'll share and we'll get started. Here we go. Share screen. Here we are. Okay. So it's my pleasure and privilege to kind of pinch hit for Amy. I am the author of several books. Like Joe was saying, my first trilogy is the Nameless Trilogy, and do I have that old covers on here? No, we do not. But these are the brand new covers, and aren't they gorgeous? I love them so much. So if you're familiar, if you're going, Nameless, that sounds really familiar, but I don't recognize the cover. The original cover it was black with a face, like half of a face on the cover. And these are obviously not black with a face on them. Hey, somebody in the chat is saying that it's echoing still. So is your mic off and your audio? Okay, let us know. Oh, people are saying yes, it's still echoing. Is that better? It's good now? Okay, yes, yay, normal again. Okay, thanks you guys. Keep us honest here. Anyway, so Nameless is the story of a girl named Zoe who infiltrates an enemy clan as a spy and ends up falling in love with an enemy soldier. I studied history when I was in college. I got my degree in history and secondary education. I love history. I love civilizations, different cultures, and kind of the mishmash of society. And I think all stories begin with a what if question. What if, whatever it is. And you probably will find in your stories that you write that the same is true. A what if question inspires story. But for me, that question was, what if I took some of my favorite cultures and different civilizations that existed in different times in history and in different places around the world, and I put them into the same region at the same time? What would that look like? How would they play together? And it's pretty bloody, it's pretty gory, but it's also a story about redemption and forgiveness and love. So that's my first trilogy. My second trilogy is they're called the Lingering Seas novels, the Lingering Sea novels. To Kill a Curse is the first book, and the second book actually comes out next week. So Of Blood and Fire releases on the 22nd. And this story is really a Mediterranean fantasy. I draw heavily again from history, but it's definitely fantasy, witches, curses, pirates. It's just a lot of fun. And I'll be talking about this book throughout this. Actually, I talk about it a little bit in my character class that I teach next hour and then later on in the day. But that is To Kill a Curse. This is me in Italy. So I really, really feel like it's an author's responsibility, if they're going to write in a world, to do a lot of research. I'm a research junkie. And for this story, I actually traveled to Italy. And so that's me on the steps of this old fishing village where my protagonist, Fina Perona, is from. And that was kind of like a mecca for me. It was a pilgrimage. It was a big journey, and I was excited to be there. When I travel, I like to have fun, and I immerse myself. And I'm kind of a dork. And I am, this picture up in the upper left-hand corner is of me in, I believe we were in Verona, Italy at the time, and everybody's sitting around eating lunch, and there's stocks in a piazza in Italy. And how do you not take a picture there? So I love this picture because all of the other people are like chilling and hanging out and doing their own thing. And I'm just going for it. Yeah, I have a lot of fun when I travel. So maybe one day I'll throw a travel trip or something to study, the locales of my next book, and I'll throw it out to the public, and you guys can come with me. Talk to your parents. I'm sure it'll only be like $5,000. Anyway, so Teen Writer's Guide is kind of my pièce de résistance, right? It is a book that I kind of mentioned in the opener, that encompasses all of the things that I've learned throughout this writing journey. And it takes you from beginning to end, and it's just a ton of fun. So that is me. And I think this one is on sale with The King's English and To Kill a Curse. But enough of that. I want to talk today about not just plotting in general, story structure in general, but actually finishing the race, like starting a book and finishing it. I can't tell you how many times teens will say, you know what, yes, I started writing and then I got to about chapter 4 and I fell off the wagon. I am kind of keeping, we're not supposed to as we teach, but I am kind of keeping an eye on the chat, and it looks like it's not lighting up. The chat isn't lighting up like the other one. Oh, you guys are being good and focusing. I should too. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure it was working. So we have this problem where we get excited, we get passionate about an idea, and then we know how it begins, we know how it ends, but then it seems to kind of like fall off the wagon in the middle. Really quickly, it's important that you understand what type of a writer you are. Are you a plotter or are you a pantser? Because you're going to approach this problem differently depending on who you are. Pros and cons, I'm going to just really quickly, pros and cons of being a plotter. A plotter is someone who has everything laid out. They have a plan. Because of that plan, it requires less time for them to kind of wander through their story and figure out where it needs to go. Less time in painted corners, painting yourself in corners. It's easy to see the full picture of your story, and so typically you tend to write faster and finish faster once that plot is in place. That's not always the case, but it's typically the case. Cons to plotting: if some people really struggle with plotting extensively their novel because it takes away some of the aspect of discovery in the story. They part of the joy of writing is being surprised along with their reader, in some instances, letting the story flow and organic, and then taking twists and turns along the way. And so plotting for them is definitely a con. Another con to plotting is it takes time, right? We get an idea, we're passionate about it, and then we want to start writing in it. But if you take the time to plot, it can sometimes delay your chance to start writing, and when maybe you're not as like jazzed about the idea or as excited about the idea in the moment. And another con for plotting for some people is that they feel confined by the plot. They feel like they can't deviate from it or take a left turn here or there, and so it kind of, the opportunity for growth and creative, organic, new developments in the story are a little bit more tricky. With pantser, a pantser is somebody who writes by the seat of their pants. I should have said that earlier. They're also known as discovery writers. A pantser, they are, the pros of pantsing is it is more spontaneous creation. There's more license to make changes. You can jump right into the writing. Cons, uncertain what comes next. Sometimes you spend time writing a full scene that you're going to realize later on in the story that you can't actually use. It can be hard to see the full picture of the story, and so you end up going back and having to layer ideas and foreshadow ideas that came to you later on in your writing process to make sure that it's smooth and streamlined. It often requires a heavier second draft than you would have if you were a plotter. I know that for me, I lean more toward pantsing, and that has really been frustrating. I want to be a strict plotter because as a professional writer, I'm under deadline always. And I don't have time to wander into, these little branches of the story to discover if I like them or not. So that's just one of the side effects. But I personally thrive in discovery writing because I feel like I'm more creative. My story goes places that I wouldn't have thought of when I was sat down to plot. The problem is pantsers need to understand story structure even more than plotters do, because they intuitively need to understand what should happen next in the story. So before we go into, I'm going to introduce to you two different plotting structures, and I'm going to spend a lot of time focusing on that murky middle, just that chapter 4 until you're building up to the climax, because that seems to be the hardest part for everyone in their plotting. There are so many different story structures. Here are some just to give you an idea. And Amy Beatty actually put together this great chart. If you email me, I will send you a copy of it. It's fantastic. My email is really easy. It's jen@teenauthorbc.com. And I'll send you her plotting chart. It's fantastic. So all stories, first we're going to talk about beginning, middle, end. All stories have a beginning. And this is really the 3-act structure. All stories introduce the main characters. They introduce the world. All beginnings introduce the main characters. They introduce the world, the genre. They introduce the major conflicts in the story. And they launch the protagonist into the story. There's going to be something that happens, some event that propels the story into action. And the protagonist is going to have to make a decision at this point. They're going to have to decide if they are choosing to embark on this adventure or if they are choosing not to. And if they don't embark on this adventure, then we don't have a story. So that is the beginning of the story. That is your act 1. I'm going to illustrate this point with 2 examples just to help you. First, we're going to use the Hunger Games because it's fairly universal and I feel like a lot of people are familiar with it. So we have Katniss Everdeen. We introduce the world, her world in District 12, her circumstance, her family. We introduce a main conflict. We see her cast of characters that surround her are very important to her. That's a core element of her character. She is a protector, and that is all shown within the first few pages of the book. This is the beginning. The beginning ends at the end of Act 1, or the end of our beginning of the story, comes from an event, and that is the reaping. When Prim's, is it Prim? It's Prim, right? Yeah, when Prim's, I have like multiple characters bouncing around in my head. When Prim's name is called in the reaping, Katniss has a moment. And in this instance, with this example, the moment that she pauses before making the decision to embark on her journey is very subtle. It's like split second. She knows right away, right when that happens, right when Prim's name is called, that she is going to volunteer as tribute. So in this instance, there's not a lot of lag, if you will. But there's not a long time of debate where she has to war within herself. But that marks the beginning of the story. We introduce world, we introduce character, we introduce the main problems, the main conflict. Obviously, in this case, it's an oppressive government, and boom, Katniss is given a decision and is going to embark on in a new journey. So that's the beginning. So the middle of your story, and this is the meat of the story. A lot of people think that the beginning and the end are the most important aspects of story, but you do not have a story unless you nail the middle. If it gets boring or slow and you find that in your reading it's lagging and it's hard to write, there's a good chance that translates to the reader as well. There's a good chance that they are going to feel like it's slow and dragging. And so there's some creative ways that we can use, tactics that we can use to help boost that middle, that we'll be talking about here in more depth in a minute. But just as an overview, the middle, or the second act of the story, is where we typically see a new cast of characters introduced. The protagonist, and if you're not familiar with that term, it's your main character. Your protagonist faces complications and conflict. We're going to see problems happen. If nothing goes wrong, you don't have a story, right? So we want these conflicts, and this is where I'm going to take you a little deeper. We want these conflicts to be interesting. We want these conflicts to be strategic ways to show character growth and to show the might and the strength of the adversary or the antagonist in the story. So eventually in this middle section, the second act, everything is going to lead up to a big event that occurs, and it could be a false victory or a false defeat. What is a false victory? It's something that feels like, yay, we did it. We won, we slayed the dragon, all is well. And then they realize that the dragon has an evil twin. I don't know. but whatever that victory, it's really not a victory. It's false. It can be a false defeat because, and that's a little bit more self-explanatory. It feels like the character has lost, but in all reality, they're going to regather and regroup and come back, and eventually, if you choose with your story, and most, I'd say 99% of stories do, they're going to win the day and have major resolution, and it's going to be great. So that is this big event. And I found that writers struggle with their midpoint event more than any other plotting point in their story. So again, this is just an overview. I'll go into this with more detail here in just a second. But this one event, imagine you're climbing a hill. You're climbing this hill and this mountain, and you're trying to roll this big boulder up a mountain, and it's hard and the work is slow and it takes time. You're setting everything up in your story throughout this time. Once you hit this big event, this peak in the middle of your story, it's going to change everything. It's going to change your story from moving in a slow progressive pace to a more rapid pace, because as soon as you get there, that boulder is going to roll down the mountain really fast. Okay. Another visual that you can think of to help you kind of wrap your head around this event is going to change your character from playing defense, if you're a sports person like me, transitioning them from defense to offense. They are going to start stop reacting to the attacks of the adversary or the antagonist, and they're going to, and this applies to realistic fiction as well. Think of like a school bully. They're done. They're not going to put up with it anymore. They're going to move forward, and now they're shifting from a defensive point of view or defensive stance to offense. They are going to start taking action. They're going to do less reacting and more acting themselves, taking initiative, making direct change to solve the conflict of the plot. Okay, so at the end of this second act, our character is going to be brought to the lowest point. It's going to seem like they've lost. It's going to, I know that if you're familiar with the Save the Cat plotting method, Blake Snyder calls this the dark night of the soul. It's going to be a moment where it feels like all is lost in the story. So that ends the second act. So let's relate this to the Hunger Games. We have a new cast of characters that are brought in. We get to know, okay, what's her name? Rue. It's Rue. We get to know Rue and all of the other participants in the Hunger Games. We get to know Haymitch a little bit better, and Effie and all of those characters. We also get a better understanding for President Snow. We know he is the enemy in the first act. We've established that, but we really come to understand what he is capable in this second act of the story. We're going to have a big false defeat in the Hunger Games, and that is, notice all the way up until Rue dies, which is our midpoint in this story. Katniss doesn't want to have anything to do with the Hunger Games. She's not going to play by the rules. Her plan is just to protect Rue, which is in perfect keeping with her character and everything she's done up to this point, because Rue does represent kind of Prim to her. She has been just trying to stay out of everybody's way. Well, once Rue dies at the midpoint of the story, we've built up, we've set everything up, we've made it so that death absolutely is the worst thing that can happen to Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games is for Rue to die, because it represents failure on Katniss's part, and she can't handle that. She can't accept that. So from that point on, do you notice how her character shifts? She becomes less reactive, and she's like, I am going to hunt these suckers down. You see that? Offense, I mean, she's playing defense, now she's playing offense. So this ends with the act 2, or the middle of the story ends with a low point where Peeta is really sick, and it feels like he's not going to survive. And the author has hit home the fact that this can't end well. This is going to be a tragedy, because there can only be one winner of the Hunger Games. And that is how the middle, or the second act of the story ends. Scene, curtain call, intermission, and now we're going to go into the third act, Act 3. How am I doing on time? Pretty good. Okay, so Act 3 of the story, of your story, is where your protagonist, your main character, discovers something new. They discover a key to solving the problem that's been plaguing them in the story. And it can be a sacrifice of a belief. It can be a newfound humility. It can be a literal object, like, hey, we found this, whatever. It can be a new ally. It can even be an act of extreme courage, facing a major fear that you've built up and foreshadowed throughout the course of the story. I would say the biggest thing about using that key, that something new, that solution to the conflict, to the main problem, has to be this. It has to be something that's so well foreshadowed. Now, when we foreshadow something, if the solution is going to be this banana that's sitting next to me, if this is the solution and I walk around the whole conference, and at the end I have a problem with Teen Author Bootcamp, and I've had this banana on my head this whole time, and then I go, oh, here's a banana, are you potassium deficient? Okay, this is the worst example ever. But it's going to kind of feel like I hit them over the head with the solution. we don't want to do that. We don't want to hit our reader over the head with a solution. We want it to be subtle. We want it to feel like readers want to be surprised. They want to make predictions, and they want to be proven right even. And so it's okay if they understand what the actual solution is, but here's the key. They have to feel a sense of aha. It has to feel satisfying, and it won't feel satisfying as if it came out of complete left field. The opposite of having a banana on my head the whole time and making it so obvious is not foreshadowing at all. And then all of a sudden I pull out a banana and say, I happen to have this banana and it will solve all of our problems. It's not a satisfying solution either, right? Why is she talking about bananas? Anyway, so you're going to resolve in this third act, you're going to resolve the main conflict, and you're going to do it in a crazy clever way. And then we're going to show in the third act, and this is a big part of the third act that I feel like in modern literature, we spend less time in, it's called the denouement. It's the falling action, the closing action, kind of like what happens, what does the world look like after the story and after this main conflict has been resolved. We see the story as it is in the beginning. We call it an opening image in the beginning of the story. What is the closing image? How will your characters live? And the iconic "and they lived happily ever after" is not going to cut it. You're going to have to show that. And your readers, they've earned it by that point, right? They have gone through, this whole journey with your characters. They want to see that they have what happens next for them. It's really satisfying. That's why fan fiction has so much. It's so popular, because people love to see what happens next, or what would happen if, I guess, too. So Hunger Games, the end, here we have a solution. We both can't win the Hunger Games. One of us will have to die. But because of the fox girl, I can't remember her name, and I'm not going to spend my time thinking about it, but because of the fox girl who died by the nightshade berries, are they called nightshade? Somebody in the chat correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they're like nightshade. Katniss gets an idea, and she knows that President Snow is very protective of his Hunger Games, and he is, there's only one solution. And I'm not going to tell you what it is, because I always get in trouble with spoilers. People get mad at me, and I kind of feel like, it's Nightlock. Thanks, guys. I kind of feel like you should have read this book by now, guys. But no judgment. It's been out for a while, so if you're new to young adult, then maybe you're still discovering so much good stuff to read. But they come up with a new solution, and we see that Katniss and Peeta survive the Hunger Games. That's the biggest spoiler I will give you. And they do. The closing image is them riding on the train back to District 12, and Katniss ends the story with her number one concern, her greatest motivation, what she wants more than anything else in the world, is to protect the people in her lives and to keep them safe. She ends the story full circle where she began, and that mission is complete. Now, this is a trilogy, and this is a great example of showing resolution within a trilogy, within a book one, where there are multiple books to follow. You see resolution there. And even though we know that there's conflict that's still going on in the following 3 books, we know that the Capitol is still a problem. President Snow is still a threat. We still feel a sense of resolution. Okay, so let's relate this to another type of story. Beginning, middle, end. We have Cinderella. We see the problem. We see that she is pretty much a slave in her own home. We get to know her a little bit, and we see the world. It's definitely a fantasy, whimsical world with talking mice and all sorts of things. Well, I guess, do they talk? They talk for us, but not to Cinderella. Let's not get into it. Anyway, so that's the beginning. There is a catalyst in this story, right? there is a springboard, if you will, and that event that is going to finish the first act of the story and launch Cinderella into the second act of the story. Do you guys know what that is? I'm going to look at the chat. What do you think happens? Okay, so the prince's invitation to the ball. Excellent. The prince invites all eligible women to the ball, whatever, or his regent does, whatever. And they so that's the catalyst is the invitation, but also the fact that she doesn't get to go. And that's kind of like the sad thing. Now, this is an example of a weak decision in this story. A lot of the early Disney princess movies tend to have characters that are not very active. They're not proactive characters. If something goes wrong, they're like, darn it, something went wrong. Her action would be, and Andrew, you're absolutely right. Her action, the decision that she makes at the end of the first act, is to make a wish. And how Disney appropriate is a wish. A dream is a wish your heart makes, and all of that stuff. Wrong movie. And she sits on that bench and she says, I just wish that I could go. And a wish is powerful in fairy tales, right? So that brings on, that decision to make a wish is what brings us into the second act of the story. So I want you right now, really quickly, and time might be a little bit of an issue. I'm only going to give you 1 minute. I want you to write 1 or 2 lines describing your beginning of your story. Keeping in mind, characters introduced, world is introduced, conflict is introduced, big event that's going to launch your character into the heart of the story and the decision made. And while you do that, I'm going to mute for you. Okay, I'm back and I've got my hair up because it's really hot in this room. So how did you do? And it's okay if you haven't. I see Josh was saying, I haven't finished my beginning yet. It's okay if you haven't. This is just a brainstorm. You can use it as a brainstorm. Hopefully you've come together. I like to give you just a second to write while I'm talking, because if you're like me, I'll take a class and then I'll be like, oh yeah, I need to do that and I need to do that. And then I kind of forget everything that I need to do by the time I actually go back to apply. So I wanted to give you some time to give yourself a few quick notes. Now let's move on. So the middle of Cinderella, what is the problem here? Cinderella is at the ball. She goes to the ball and something's going to happen. I gotta turn off the chat because it's distracting me. She meets the prince, and our midpoint of the story, we have some action building up to this midpoint that she's getting ready. Her people turn into pumpkins and mice are horses, and all sorts of things happen. And we get kind of like some of the whimsy, some of the promise of the premise, if you will. It's the payoff of the story. It's what would occur during, like, if this book was a movie trailer, or if we were showing a movie trailer of Cinderella, we would have the bibbidi bobbidi boo scene where she's like turning everything into, we would see the magic and whimsy of the story. Those are building moments leading up to the story, where we kind of take a pause on the main conflict that existed in the beginning, right? We stop thinking so much about the fact that she is an indentured servant living in her own home, and all of her other problems. And we start kind of taking action and getting ready to get to that midpoint. The midpoint of the story is Cinderella dancing with the prince at the ball. That is the midpoint. And then the second act ends with Cinderella actually clock strikes 12. Cinderella has to race off, and she had her night. And is this an example, and I'll look at the chat here, is this an example of a false victory or a false defeat? False victory, for sure. Yes, this is a false victory. We have everything that she wanted. She wanted to go to the ball. She wanted to dance with the prince. This is an example, and this is a storytelling device that you might find helpful. This is an example of a story that starts with a character feeling like they know what they want, right? And sometimes in your stories, you're going to find that what your character wants is not necessarily what they need or what's right for them. Right now, she's kind of living a lie at the ball. She is dressed up like a princess, and she is impersonating a princess, and that's not really who she is. If you have ever seen, what's the movie called? With the Cinderella. What's the one? With Drew Barrymore.
Happily Ever After.
Happily Ever After. No, not Happily.
Ever After.
Ever After. If you've seen that one, a lot of problems come from her decision to go to the ball, and she's an imposter, and the prince finds out that she's an imposter, and he's angry with her. So there's a lot more complexity to that story than this Disney version, but still, it ends with her. In both stories, it ends with her punished, and things were worse than they were before they started, and that's the end of our second act. So I want you to think about your middle, and I'm going to give you just a second to talk about I don't really have a ton of time. I'm going to give you 30 seconds. And just identify this one thing. What is the false victory or false defeat of your story? What is the midpoint of your story? The point where your character stops reacting and starts taking action and being proactive. The point when your character stops playing defense and they switch to offense. That's it. I'm not hiding anymore. I'm going to come out and fight. What is the event that kind of makes them make that decision? Okay, so I'm sorry. I know I'm not giving you very much time, but we got to keep going. The end, and I'm going to be much faster. Here is the resolution. We obviously know the climax. The shoe fits. We don't see a lot of the closing action, but it is a classic. They lived happily ever after, type of story. And it is very kind of two-dimensional. It's not very complex story, but that is just a good example. So think about your ending. How does your opening scene compare to your closing scene? Is there satisfaction there? Is there a sense of completion and coming full circle? And is there growth? That is the biggest thing. How have your characters grown? What have they done? How have their personality traits and their decisions helped them become something better or greater than they were at the beginning of the story? If there isn't growth, if it's just that your characters fought their way through this gauntlet of all of these different things and they came out of the gauntlet and they are alive. If they haven't sacrificed, if they haven't grown, then the story itself is going to feel very flat, even if it's the coolest concept story ever. The other thing is the world should change. The problems surrounding the character and their world should be resolved, or there should be obvious change, or perhaps they've made it worse, and that's a good way to launch into the second act. But the main thing is that the conflict that you introduce in the beginning of the story has to be resolved at the end of the story for your reader to feel a sense of satisfaction as they complete that. So now, oh, here's that, here it is, take a screenshot of this. This is, I forgot I put this in here. This is Amy Beatty's plotting structure chart. We just went through the 3-act structure. If you see at the top, 3-act structure. I am actually going to introduce, and there's so many great resources. I highly recommend, at the bottom of this page, you'll see amybeatty.com. I highly recommend that you go to her website, and she has a tab that says for writers, and go and look at her story structure chart, because she gives you resources to all of these plotting structures. And if you're like a plotting guru, it's so helpful to be able to look at that at a glance. And this chart is available on her website too. Okay, so moving on really quickly. Oh, there's all the stuff. Okay, so here's my plotting structure that I introduce in Teen Writer's Guide. And I'm going to go quickly through this because I've already touched on kind of the main concepts of story, but this is how I plot my novels. Instead of doing 3 acts, I like to focus on 6. I have 6 points because it's a little bit more specific, and I feel like I like to plot the turning points in the acts. So it's not just like beginning, middle, end. It's beginning, the turning point into the 2nd act, middle, the turning point into the 3rd act, end. But I have fun names for them, and I relate it to cars because of this book. And if you pick up this book, you'll understand why cars and road trips are so paramount in my childhood, and it's a lot of fun. So definitely, if you want to go in more depth, I give tons of examples in this book. You should pick it up. Email me if you do. If you have questions, I am a very good email correspondent, so you can let me know. So I start with the starting line. This is the first thing that my character sees in the story. And I really, with intention, plan my first line hook, my characterization hook, because characters should hook the reader just by their characterization. I'm going to talk about that in the next hour. If you come to my class, I'll give you more information about characters. The conflict hook, like what's the main conflict of the story, the genre hook, and the narrative voice hook, like the narration itself. What does that look like? Joe, will you text? He's going to a game right now. Will you text Clint and tell him they're underneath my sink? Sorry about that. Anyway, sink. All right, so that's the starting line. The springboard is that big catalyst event. It's that single event. It's usually something bad. It's Katniss's sister's name being pulled from in the reaping. It's a single event that launches your character into the story, and it should result in, it doesn't always, like with Cinderella and with Katniss Everdeen, the decision that comes that the main character has to make after that event is an easy decision. I tend to love when characters have to make a hard choice. It's not just, should I go on this adventure, or should I stay? It's, dare I go? Dare I stay? And usually the choice to embark on the journey, and that journey is not just applying to fantasy novels, I'll say that again, but to embark on this new course is usually the morally correct one, but it's also the harder decision. That's when it's really satisfying springboard. And reaching the summit is your midpoint. And I won't spend time on it because I already talked about it. It's that large event, the false positive or the false negative. I mean, the false victory or the false defeat. The stakes are going to be raised just like that ball rolling down the hill. And we're going to really test the mettle of your character moving forward from this point, moving from defense to offense. The head-on collision. This is another point that I like to plot. This is like the last thing in the second act of the story. It is the lowest point of the story. It's the moment when all feels lost. It feels like happily ever after isn't even an option. It's not possible. And so the more real you can make this, the more satisfying your victory is going to be. Does that mean I'm done? Okay, I'm almost there. The victory is your climax. So it is, they dust themselves, you know, they rise from the ashes of their main conflict, their lowest point, and they're going to find something new, figure out some new way to solve the problem, and this is the solution to the main conflict. Make sure it's foreshadowed. A note about magic, just really quickly, if you have a magic system that your character is learning or using throughout the story, or if magic is involved at all in the story, make sure that if we understand the magic system a lot and kind of learn the magic system along with the main character, it can be used as part of the solution of the story. But if the magic is too easy and it's too familiar and it's just like Gandalf solved all the problems and the hobbits didn't have to do anything, then it's going to feel weak. So magic can't be the solution to that story. Another day, another time, I have a magic systems class that I'd be happy to kind of help you with. If that is something that you're interested in, you can email me and I'll hook you up. Okay, the final destination is the last one. That is your closing image. It's the world after. And we see the characters and we see where they progressed. Here's my order that I plot in. And if nothing else, I think that this is probably the most helpful information that I can give you, because a lot of people are just like, how do I even begin? You can't understand the middle of the story unless you first understand these 3 points: your starting line, your victory, and your final destination. How it begins, how the problem is solved, and how it ends. The other thing, after I know those 3 things, then I really start to figure out my middle. That is my springboard, that catalyst moment that launches my story into my character into the adventure of the story, the midpoint or summit of the story, and the lowest point of my character will hit. I have to understand character to effectively plot each of these points. So I always start a story with character. I never start plotting until I understand character. And that's my next class. I'm going to be teaching next hour. If you don't catch it next hour, you can catch a recording or maybe catch me later in the day. Q&A. How much time do we have? Probably not very much. We can probably do a few questions. Let me see what you guys have. Stop sharing and I'll come back to me. So Andrew Kinney, toward the end, could we possibly touch on how to write a good red herring trail? You know, this is something that I feel the red herring is all about foreshadowing. A red herring is just about dropping little specific details. And the key is specific. Don't hit your reader over the head with oh, he looks really bad. Use little things like subtle twitches that the character that you're trying to use as a red herring maybe has. Maybe like I said, twitches, but maybe like a left eye twitch every time he talks about something that makes you suspicious. A red herring, for those of you who don't know, is basically a false trail. You want your solution not to feel so obvious, or your big reveal not to feel so obvious. So you plant decoys, and so for those decoys to feel real and satisfying and really then you don't want to do it too overtly, because then it's too obvious. Oh, they're trying to trick me. It can't be this guy because he's already bad. So it's usually giving that character something to love, giving that character depth and dimension, giving that solution a sense of, make it cloudy still, make it, maybe make it, yeah, like 60% that could be the solution, instead of, you know, the handlebar mustache guy that, oh, clearly he's evil. And then we try and use him as a red herring, and it's just like, of course he wasn't the bad guy, because that would have been too obvious. So be subtle with it. That's probably my best bit of advice. What do you do when you decide to make a big change to your structure after you've started writing? If it's the right decision, if you know that this is the right move for the story, Stephen King says we need to be willing to kill our darlings. And that means killing off characters, killing off words, but it also means killing off ideas. And it's very unlikely for your first plotting plan to be the one that you stick with 100%. I've never, ever written a book where I started with a plan and I finished with that same plan exactly. I always deviate from the course. I always come up with new ideas and new ways to twist and manipulate my characters and my world and the story. Okay, so just be willing to change, I guess is my best answer. Be willing to kill those darlings and make the change. Okay, so false victory. In Hunger Games, is this when she destroys Caesar's stash? But spoiler. Okay.
Last question.
This is my last question. This is it. This is my last question. So in the Hunger Games, it's actually not, they don't have a false victory. Usually it's one or the other. It's either a false victory or a false defeat. So just keep that in mind. One thing that I will leave you with, I wish we could just hang out this whole time, but I've got to give time for the next class to start, is jump on my website at what's my website? authorjenniferjenkins.com and sign up for my newsletter. I'm giving away a ton of stuff this week of TABC to all of the people that are on my newsletter list. So if you're already there, great, you're set. Sign up for my newsletter if you're not, and you can win copies of Teen Writer's Guide and a few other things leading up to my launch. So I'm going to be doing a fun online event for that. So anyway, thanks you guys. It was so fun. I hope you have a great day. Take care.